Welcome to this quick dive, where we explore key gospel concepts in 5 minutes or less. If you're short on time or want a visual summary of our longer podcast, this short-form video is for you. Let's take a clearer look at priesthood power and what it really means for each of us.
All right, let's dive right in. Today we're going to talk about a concept you probably think you know pretty well, priesthood power. But we're going to look at it from a new angle, one that our source materials suggest is broader, way more personal, and, honestly, more powerful than you might have ever considered.
So, let me just ask you this. When you hear that word priesthood, what's the very first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's something really specific, maybe an image of leadership or a formal position in the church. Just kind of hang on to that thought for a second.
Because the source we're digging in today really pushes us to think bigger. It suggests that priesthood isn't just about an office someone holds. It's something much, much bigger. It's God's power itself. And that one little shift in how we see it, it's the key to everything else we're about to unpack. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. To really understand what's meant by the power of godliness, we need to look at the exact words the source text uses. No guessing games here. So here it is, the core definition, and it comes from a book of scripture called the Doctrine and Covenants. It describes priesthood power as the power of godliness. Did you catch that? It's a subtle but huge shift. It moves the whole idea away from just being a title or a job and reframes it as this dynamic, divine energy. So if it's this kind of invisible power, how do we actually see it or feel it? Well, the scripture gives us a surprisingly direct answer. It says, "In the ordinances thereof, the power of godliness is manifest." In other words, these ordinances are the places where the power stops being abstract and becomes real and tangible. It draws a straight line from a specific action to a divine result.
And that, of course, brings us to the next big question. If this power shows up in ordinances, well, how does that work? Let's break down the actual process that the source describes.
Right. So, how exactly do these things connect? How does a formal ordinance act like a channel for this incredible power of godliness? Well, believe it or not, the source lays out a very clear path.
Check this out. The source presents it as a really clear three-step process. First, you participate in priesthood ordinances. That leads to step 2, where you make, and just as importantly, keep sacred promises or covenants. And finally, step 3, it's the act of honoring those covenants that unlocks the door, giving you access to the power of godliness. It's a super personal and active process.
So just so we're all on the same page, when the text says ordinances, we're talking about these formal, sacred acts. Think baptism or ceremonies you do in a temple. The key thing to get here is that they're the designated channels for making those covenants we just mentioned. And those covenants are what plug you into God's power. That link is absolutely crucial for what's coming next.
Okay, everything we've talked about so far has been building up to this moment. This is, without a doubt, the most important point in the whole source. It's the big reveal that totally redefines who this power is for.
Which leads us to the most critical question of all, doesn't it? If this power is accessed through ordinances and covenants, then who? Who exactly is this for? Who gets to access this power of godliness?
And here it is. The answer stated as plainly as possible in a quote from President Russell M. Nelson. He says, "Every woman and every man who makes covenants with God and keeps those covenants, and who participates worthily in priesthood ordinances, has direct access to the power of God." That's the mic drop. Access isn't defined by your gender, it's defined by your actions. The same actions for everybody. Make covenants, participate in ordinances. Period.
So let's just put these two ideas side by side to make it crystal clear. The common perception, it often ties priesthood to a formal office, one held only by men. But this new perspective from the source, it defines priesthood as God's power, a power accessible to both women and men who follow that exact same covenant path. This is a game changer because it very deliberately separates the power of the priesthood from the offices of the priesthood.
So what's the point of all this? Why does this reframing matter to you and me on a personal level?
Well, the source actually wraps up by turning that very question back to us.
Yeah, after laying all this out, the text makes it personal. It asks us to just think about the role these ordinances and covenants play in our own lives. And it leaves us with one final simple question to really chew on. What would your life be like without them?
It's an invitation to weigh for yourself what access to God's power really means to you. And that, right there, is a whole new perspective on priesthood power.
Thanks for watching this quick dive. If it brought you clarity or encouragement, we'd love it if you'd like, share, and subscribe. For a deeper exploration of this topic, check out the full podcast linked below. We'll see you in the next one.